Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. Sergio Perez may be in serious trouble with Helmut Marko revealing that Red Bull intend to put Liam Lawson in the AlphaTauri for at least a few races next season. That would be 5 Red Bull drivers for just 4 Red Bull-esque seats, putting Sergio Perez's position at Red Bull in serious danger next season. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always, I'd greatly appreciate it. First of all, an interesting statement here from Carlos Sainz, just talking about Ferrari's progress for next year. Of course, we always know there's massive optimism coming out of the Ferrari camp every single season in terms of what they're going to achieve for the upcoming year. They believe they're making good progress. We believe that in comparison to Mercedes, Ferrari are sticking with slightly more of their car design rather than Mercedes are basically throwing everything away. But Sainz intends to win the World Championship, right? At the end of the day, that is the intention of these top guys. We do believe that Sainz will get a contract extension to some degree at Ferrari, but, well, it's not going to be for as long as Charles Leclerc's is, which has raised questions, certainly from the external perspective, as to whether there really is a number one driver at Ferrari, although they might not necessarily say that there is. Sainz, of course, wants to go one step further, sure. Sainz, during the 2022 season, when there was a front-running Ferrari at the start of that season, had a fair few mistakes. Australia most certainly springs to mind, when Leclerc was winning races and competing for the championship at the start of the season before Ferrari did what Ferrari do, and it all kind of fell apart. But Sainz says, my main motivation is to be the champion. That's what we've got to try for. I think we have the capacity. So it's one thing, of course, to say so. It's another thing for Ferrari to actually deliver it. But lots of questions on what Red Bull are planning over the next couple of years. Johnny Herbert and others have given their thoughts on what Lando Norris should do. Even I think Martin Brundle said that Norris should not exactly sign a massive extension with McLaren. He's there until at least 2025, but we know that Verstappen's at Red Bull until 28. Leclerc is possibly at Ferrari until at least 27. That's the current rumour. So would Norris be wise not to sign an extension? Sure, McLaren are looking good. They've made good progress, but, well, they haven't won a championship in a rather long time, and Red Bull are winning everything right now. Now, there's a question as to whether if you're Norris, you actually want to go to Red Bull, but we know full well there is interest there. Horner has said it. The other guys at Red Bull have said it, that, you know, they've talked to Norris, they've tried to make that work before, and I wouldn't be massively surprised if they try and make that work again after his contract is over with McLaren, or potentially even before, if they don't think Ricciardo or Tsunoda is the man for the long term to be Verstappen's teammate. And this is where there are serious questions on what the Red Bull plan is behind the scenes right now in terms of Sergio Perez, Ricciardo and Tsunoda within that program alongside Max. They tried De Vries at the start of last season. That did not last particularly long. Ricciardo then made the return, and then Ricciardo, when he broke his hand in Zandvoort, Liam Lawson had to come in for a few races, did a very spectacular job. Let's not forget, he went to Zandvoort, turns up in Singapore, knocks both Red Bulls out of qualifying, right? So sure, Red Bull messed up it that weekend, but, Lawson comes through. I think he unlapped himself in the on Verstappen in Zandvoort, which is impressive enough in the first place, and then the next race, he turns up and, knocks Verstappen out of quali in Q2. So, Lawson obviously had a great debut, and sure, overall, Tsunoda outperformed him, just like Tsunoda did to all of his teammates last season, but Lawson, of all the drivers that weren't Yuki, was the more impressive, and arguably, given Lawson's situation coming in last minute, was the most impressive AlphaTauri driver last year. I think you can certainly argue it, more so than Nick De Vries. Now, to be fair to De Vries, he was driving a tractor, right? At the start of the season, that AlphaTauri was terrible, and even though Tsunoda was having great races, he was P11, 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 like he couldn't get a point to save his life. At the end of the year, the car was better, scored a fair few points, but by that time, De Vries had been comprehensively kicked out of the team. So Helmut Marko and Red Bull have given some thoughts on the matter here. Helmut Marko also said a few other things. This was an interview here with OE24. I will say, kind of frustrating as far as I'm concerned, that the interviewer, after asking the question and getting a very interesting response, doesn't dig any deeper. The interviewer gets a very spicy response, we'll see in a second, on the future of Lawson and Perez and whatever's going on. And, surely you've got to ask Marko, okay, what do you mean by that, Mr. Marko? Can you clarify a bit more? But no, they go on to ask about Michael Schumacher, which is unfortunately what they always do. But Helmut Marko, these were the key highlights really of the interview. I'll leave it all linked down below. Talking firstly about his future with Red Bull. We know there was drama, well, rumoured drama, and given it's Red Bull, there might be some truth to this. Behind the scenes, that Marko and Horner were somewhat at odds. I think this was a bit of an inevitability after the passing of Dietrich Mateschitz. Marko was his kind of right-hand man in a sense. Now Oliver Mintzlaff is in charge. he has a different perspective on the way he sees Marko within the organisation. That's the rumour. Other rumours that Horner wants to take more control of the AlphaTauri operation. Mintzlaff doesn't want that to be the case. So there's various things going on, and we believe that Horner had the say in changing, getting rid of Franz Tost, basically, from AlphaTauri, bringing in Lauren McKees and, Peter Bayer, is it? The other changes they made over there at AlphaTauri. But Marko says that after apparently an important meeting with Red Bull bosses, they have clarified his future in a positive sense. He says everything is continuing as planned, and actually he says that he will be attending all 24 races next season. That's the current plan, which is pretty mega for Marko, not gonna lie. The fact that this guy's like 80 and, he's keeping on, cracking on, he's going to be attending all the races. Even Toto Wolff and maybe Horner and others have said that, well, 24 is a lot, especially because some of them are triple headers, back to back to back. Lots of work for the teams, for everyone involved. So they, even Russell said that maybe a rotation of staff might be necessary. And even was it Japan, but certainly obviously Brazil 2022 that Toto Wolff didn't attend just because, it gets a bit much. Totally get it. But for Marko, apparently no problem at all. So he's going to do everything. And as he says, everything's continuing as planned, whether that means that it's all exactly the same as it was before, and whether Marko still kind of stands by his comments that when he says, look, I will make the decisions as to when I step away, not Mr. Horner, was the quote he said at the time. He was also asked on the 2026 power unit, even though we're still a long way from a competitive deployment, everything is going according to plan, the performance curve is correct. So he rumoured a couple of months ago that it's Red Bull and Mercedes that are ahead of the pack, and then it's Ferrari and, the other power unit developers slightly behind. But of course, that's Marko saying it. Of course, he's probably going to be more positive on the Red Bull project than otherwise. The overall belief seems to be that Mercedes have a bit of an edge at the moment. But we talked the other day, rumours around, well, not really rumours, confirmation that the split turbo feature of some of these power units in the ICEs will no longer be allowed, might potentially give Ferrari a slight advantage. But this is the discussion on Sergio Perez and his future within the team, because Marko says, understandably, they are looking for Checo's successor. I'm frankly surprised that Perez has lasted this long. I mean, 21, 22, 23 and 24. It's a long time to partner Verstappen in the Red Bull, and, arguably he's got kind of worse and worse every single year in terms of his overall performance, but the results have got slightly better every year because the car has got better. I think he was, fourth? He must have been fourth back in 2021, third in 22, seconds now just about in 23. So, sure, on paper, great, but, when you look at the actual points and the numbers and the scoring, then it's not quite the same story. So Perez will not get another year. I'm convinced that surely they're not going to give him another contract. I don't think that would make much sense. Now, finding a teammate for Max that can actually handle it is tough, and Perez has shown that, although this most recent season, when he thought maybe he was on for a title, then it kind of collapsed. He has been a good wingman before, especially in 2021, for example, and arguably did a better job for Verstappen and Red Bull in 2021 than, let's say, Albon would have done if they'd have kept him on in the car. So totally get why Perez has been there, but it's probably about time for them to move on from Sergio as a driver, especially if they do expect, as they should expect, the competitive order to crunch up somewhat. You can't afford Verstappen to be P1 to P3 somewhere, and, Perez to be P9 to P10 somewhere, as he's been on average the most recent season. Not acceptable, but as Marko says, as things stand, we will fulfill his contract, or he will fulfill his contract until the end of 2024, then we will see. So, and even there was rumours the other day that Horner had basically told Perez that it's in your hands and you've got to be top 4 in qualifying every time. Basically, this is the theory, that Perez has got to be at least top 4 in qualifying, and if he can't deliver those type of results, then, he's out of the team. But of course, the question would be, if and when he is out of the team, what happens instead? This was, to me, the really interesting quote here from Marko when he was asked about, what about Liam Lawson? What about the future for him? Because Lawson was apparently promised a seat in 2025. That's the rumour, that they told Lawson, look, you did a great job, but we can't offer you a seat on the grid right now because of the way things are going. because Perez has a contract, and I guess they don't want to void it for no reason, especially because he did get P2 in the championship after all. They don't want to void his contract for, you know, a benefit which is probably undefined. So they told Lawson, all right, just sit on the sidelines, stay as our kind of junior development driver behind the scenes, and we'll get you a seat in 25. Don't worry about it. Now, that's not exactly in writing, because, you know, they could do what they want at the end of the day, but they have apparently promised Lawson that just stay with us, don't go to Williams or something, and we will get you a seat. Now, how exactly is that going to work, though? Because as Marko says, yes, and before that, he should at least drive a few more races so that we can see where his potential really lies, which is a very interesting comment, right? Because this seems to very much be implying Formula 1 races, right? Because, doing in more races in Super Formula or something isn't going to tell you any more than you already know. What's going to tell you more is doing more races in an F1 car. We've seen a few races from this season, most of which very impressive. I think what I found most impressive, really, he just jumped into the AlphaTauri in Zandvoort and, didn't crash, didn't have any spins, didn't have any moments, held his own for the entire weekend and obviously qualified relatively well. Sure, a couple of circuits, he was a bit off Yuki, but that's to be expected for someone in Lawson's position. But yeah, how exactly, if you're Red Bull, do you execute this? Before that, he should at least drive a few more races so we can see where his potential really lies. So seemingly Marko's implying that they are planning, and it's in the works, to put Lawson in the car at some point. I mean, how else do you explain this? So if you're going to do that, and you're going to say, right, Lawson, you're going to get a few more races this year at AlphaTauri, because I don't imagine they're going to put him straight into the Red Bull, then how do you execute that? Either you tell Ricciardo or you tell Tsunoda, okay, you're going to have a couple of races out of the car and we're going to put Lawson in instead. In which, that feels like a difficult conversation to have, especially if there's, fights for championship points, fights for championship positions. Ricciardo or Tsunoda might be in a good position. They want to prove their worth. They might be going to a good track, or maybe the car's got some upgrades. They want to test it out. And they're telling Yuki, no, you're out for 2 races. Lawson's coming in. And then they tell Ricciardo, you're out for 2 races. Lawson's coming in. It's pretty rare. Doesn't seem particularly likely to me. The more likely explanation for this would probably be aligned with the rumours we heard a little while ago now that there is heavy consideration to put this man in the middle, Mr. Daniel Ricciardo, back into the Red Bull. It was rumoured a little while ago now that there's a clause in Ricciardo's contract which will allow him to replace Perez at Red Bull, and apparently he is their absolute number one option to do so. There was rumours back at the end of September that he is for sure Red Bull's first choice to replace Perez in 2024, mid-season or otherwise. So Red Bull are no strangers to putting someone in mid-season. We saw what happened just this year with Nick de Vries. Wasn't performing, he's out of the car. Next year, if, hopefully, the other teams can actually produce something of a competitive package, if McLaren, Ferrari, maybe Aston, but, Mercedes can get in the mix, can get relatively competitive, and Perez is still 3 to 4 tenths off max, that's not going to be good enough for where Red Bull need him to be. Can Ricciardo do a better job? That's an entirely different debate, and people have their thoughts on that as to whether Ricciardo is actually going to be a good option for Red Bull, whether they should get Yuki instead, or whether they just try and get Norris or somebody else in the car. We know it's difficult, but, in the history of Red Bull over the last few years, Ricciardo has been the only one really, when he was there alongside Max, to, challenge and be relatively competitive. Okay, a younger Max at the time, but still a Max with a lot of pace in him, no doubt about it. So, I think Red Bull still believe, and Horner still believes, Ricciardo can and should be that guy. But the heavy implication now for quite a while has been that this is a possibility mid-season, that they might well just chalk off Perez's contract before they even get to the end of the year, especially when Joe Soward said that, there's a provision in Ricciardo's contract that will allow him to switch to Red Bull after the early races next year. So we're talking, 5-6 races in, really. If it's not going so well, then, if Perez doesn't up his game from the end of this most recent season, Ricciardo will be in, Ricciardo's salary will triple, and Lawson will replace him at AlphaTauri alongside Yuki Tsunoda. So, that was a rumour, but now we've got Helmut Marko saying that no, he at least should be driving a few more races, which kind of implies to me that this is a plan of Red Bull to make this happen. I think that the only explanation of Lawson driving a few more races next year is that there's a theoretical plan to put Ricciardo into the Red Bull, basically just kick Perez straight out of the sport and, bring Lawson in alongside Tsunoda. At the end of the day, as Horner has made it clear, it is in Perez's hands. If he steps up his game, if he's all of a sudden half a tenth off max every single weekend, perfect as far as Red Bull are concerned. And they believe that putting the pressure on him in that way is going to deliver the results. But if that doesn't happen, as you'd probably expect it not to, as I say, his performance has probably regressed on average over the last 3 years, and I don't really expect that to change its trajectory this upcoming season. Of course, generally, Perez has been better towards the start of the season because as the car tends to develop, they tend to, put a bit more front end on the car and stuff. The Verstappen likes, Perez doesn't like it so much. There are even rumours this year that Perez was asking Red Bull to go back to an older upgrade package that he preferred, and Red Bull said, said, nah, we ain't doing that, brother. Like, Max likes this one, so that's what we are going to stick with. So I'm not sure that Perez's like early season advantage, it's never like an advantage on Max, but early season beneficial situation compared to where Perez might be in a few races time. I'm not even sure that necessarily will apply next year, because I'm sure Red Bull will take many of their learnings from 22 and 23 and deliver them onto the car straight out of the gate, which arguably puts Perez in an even more vulnerable position than he already is. So very much enjoy your thoughts on that in the comments below. Just one final thing to mention here from Fernando Alonso. Rumour has it that a new deal will be on the table for Alonso to extend. Of course, like, the guy's been around for so long, it's ridiculous, but he's still performing at a very high level. Had a great season, of course, in 2023. I guess for Alonso's point of view, what does he feel about Aston Martin's progress? He's there for one more year, so, does he want to extend that deal? Does he want to stay on longer, like Hamilton probably will, through 25, potentially even 26, when the new regulations come in, and Aston Martin at that time, the big factory, the Honda Works partnership. There's lots of, positivity around Aston Martin's future, despite the lackluster end of this most recent season. But I think for Alonso, you've got to think like, all right, are we going to regress again to be a midfield team? And if Aston are, then, maybe it's not worth sticking around. If there's more podiums on the horizon, sure, it's potentially going to be worth it. So I guess the talks will be kind of simple, because Aston aren't going to turn down Alonso. They're not going to do what Alpine did and say to Alonso, well, you're getting a bit old now, we only want you to do a one-year deal. They have a lot of respect for Alonso. They know that Alonso demands that respect of his teams. So, I don't think it's an issue from their side. I guess the question is for Fernando as to whether he sees that as a viable option over the coming years. But very much interested to your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.